Good morning, everyone, and happy holidays. I'm Lyndall Stout. We hope you're having a wonderful Christmas season. We join you today from Stillwater Milling Company, the perfect place with the hustle and bustle of a feed store to talk about the economic situation. Joining us now are some of our ag economic specialists. We have Larry Sanders, who focuses on ag policy, Kim Anderson, our grain and crop marketing specialist, and Daryl Peel, who is our livestock marketing specialist. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. For me, the big stories of 2012, without question, drought, prices, and there was something called a presidential election that we definitely talked about. As we start our discussion this morning, let's begin with the drought discussion, because no doubt that is affecting a lot of people across Oklahoma. Kim, why don't you weigh in to start with the crop impact?
Well, the drought had multiple impacts on the crops, depending on whether it was summer crop or winter crop. And one thing we got to remember on the drought, it was our second year of droughts, especially in the wheat market. Now, as far as wheat production, our wheat production was relatively good. We got timely rains. Even though we were in the top 3 tiers of drought conditions, we still produced a relatively good wheat crop. I think the big impacts on drought from a wheat perspective is that we got the crop. But when you get into the summer crops, the cotton, the corn, the soybeans, the milo, we had short crops on them because of the drought. And then if you look across the United States, the impact it had on the corn crop, a very, very short corn crop, and that had an impact on our crop prices later in the year. So the impact, 2 years in a row, relatively good production, but the long-term impact is from the national drought, 60% of the United States in drought condition.
And obviously drought, again, playing in the livestock area.
Absolutely. It was the second year of drought. And you know, the 2 years of drought, 2011 and 2012, from a livestock perspective, were kind of a study in contrast. You know, this was another year of drought, but because we did have some winter moisture, we did have some early spring forage production, and we had some winter wheat to graze during the winter last year. 2011 was a big year of liquidation because we had no spring and we liquidated a lot of animals. And because we had done that, 2012, we were able to get through most of 2012 from a livestock perspective in Oklahoma with relatively little additional liquidation. Tough year. We didn't have a lot of forage. We could see it was getting dry. The second half of the year was very traditional kind of drought in that it's gotten tougher and tougher. And the thing is now we find ourselves here at the end of the year with a dry winter in the making, and the conditions now are every bit as severe from a cattle perspective as they were at any time during 2011, even though all in all it's probably not been as tough a year to get to this point, but it doesn't bode well from this point forward given the conditions that we find ourselves in today.
And obviously, Larry, from a policy point of view, thank goodness for crop insurance.
Yes, you know, I think that if producers needed a reminder of how important risk management is, unfortunately, they're getting a pretty tough lesson here with this being the second year in a row of this, and it's coming at a time when the policy piece of the puzzle is really falling apart. We've gone a year now without some of the key disaster aid programs out of the Farm Bill. Farm Bill officially has expired, and while in the short term it's okay on the disaster assistance part, it's been pretty tough, but it's made everybody really focus on the importance of crop insurance. And that's probably one of the reasons where we'll talk in a little bit about why that's become the centerpiece of the next Farm Bill.
Okay. Looking at prices, there were some ups and downs. Kim, we talk to you every week about wheat prices and that old sideways pattern. We've talked a lot about the last few months, but kind of give us a look back.
Well, we came into the harvest under drought conditions, but we got the timely rains. We were having a relatively large crop and expecting a good crop in the United States. Wheat prices were right at $6 per bushel, but from early June or mid-June into July the 19th, wheat prices increased from $6 to $9 a bushel, a 50% increase in wheat prices over that time period, and we already had the crop in the bin. And go back to the drought, it was the impact on corn. And we saw a $3 increase in corn prices over that time period. As you've said, they've been flat since that period. But reductions in corn production, the expectations. Corn stocks were expected to be 1.8 billion bushels, and they're down around 800 million bushels. Corn prices are supporting the wheat prices, and it's the drought impact on that corn and the potential impact, the poor conditions of the current wheat crop as we're looking to the 13 crop. They're protecting the wheat that's in the bin, and that's holding our prices relatively high, with wheat prices around $8.60.
Okay. Daryl, let's talk about livestock prices. Obviously, the massive sell-off in 2011 and some of that, cattle producers had some cash in hand, but beef prices remaining pretty steady, if not pretty good.
It's amazing. The drought is normally not kind to cattle prices, and even in 2011, which was a bigger year of liquidation than 2012, even in a national perspective, and yet prices have held up well. We set new record prices for feeder cattle, for fed cattle in the spring of 2012, and throughout the year, even though you can pick out some things that you probably would think are drought impacts, we've maintained prices above year-ago levels throughout this process, even with much of the country in drought. And that's a testament to some underlying conditions that were in place before the drought, and that the drought has exaggerated in terms of where we are with cattle numbers. And this is very much a supply-driven industry, and so even with all the adversity of the drought, certainly all the production issues that go with the drought, we're holding up very well on prices, and we will continue to because of that supply situation.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about presidential politics and some of the other factors influencing agriculture. But first, let's take a look at CowCalf Corner with Glenn Selk.
Recently, I pulled up next to a pickup with a trailer, and I think they were headed to a local livestock market to sell the calves that were in that trailer. They looked like they were weaning age calves, but I couldn't help but notice that all of them still had horns that were about this long. And the thought went through my mind, this producer is going to leave some dollars on the table that he could have got when he marketed those calves. When you look at the USDA Market News Service reports, you'll often see listed in those reports the differences for value-added calves compared to calves that have not had some of the preconditioning management practices put to them. And even though certainly the calf supply is pretty short, and it seems like buyers should be willing to pay for any calf, you'll notice there's still a difference in the prices that those value-added calves will bring. Looking this past week, it was in the neighborhood of about $6 to $10 per hundredweight for the lighter calves. The range gets a little narrower when you get to some of those heavier yearlings between the regular calves and the value-added calves. But certainly it does make a difference as those calves go through the ring. Those that we know have been vaccinated, dehorned, castrated, and have been weaned for at least 45 days, that they're going to present less problems for that next buyer. And still, with this tight calf market, it looks to me like they're willing to pay a pretty substantial difference. So when you're thinking about marketing calves this upcoming year, certainly keep in mind that what that buyer is going to want is a calf that's going to give him the least amount of trouble. And if we'll go ahead and do some of those simple management practices at home, we'll receive, it looks to me like, a premium of someplace in the neighborhood of $6 to $10 per hundredweight. Hope you keep that in mind in the year 2013, and we look forward to visiting with you again next time on SUNUP's CowCalf Corner.
We're continuing our year-end wrap-up now. Let's talk a little bit about politics, gentlemen, and the economic situation, both here at home and abroad. And Larry, let's let you weigh in first on all of that.
Well, in spite of all the hoopla, I don't really think the presidential election had much of a direct impact on agriculture. But there is a situation where we need to understand somewhat better that the foundation that is being laid here for what's to come is very important, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think we're all just kind of sitting on a precipice of what's going to happen next, both in the economy and beyond that. The prices we were just talking about, I think many of the foreign markets are blaming us, rightly or wrongly, about the high price of foodstuffs, maybe saying that we're turning it all into ethanol instead of providing food. So that debate is still going to be back there, and it's playing into part of the Arab Spring unrest. I think what farmers can look toward as they begin to see how the market worked this past year is we are breaking all records, both net farm income and trade. We're selling more than we ever have to the rest of the world. And all you really need to do is look north, south, or west to see where our major markets are. So in spite of the fact that Europe seems to be falling apart, that has not been a significant impediment on how we're doing in agriculture.
Kim, your thoughts?
Well, I think you got to look at the economic and political situations, not just in the United States. I don't think our economic situation has had an impact on our prices at this point, but they have had a secondary impact from what's going on in the European Union with Greece and their economic problems, with Spain and their problems, and the different countries in the European Union, and the concern about the euro. Is the euro going to hold together? China also is having some economic problems. There's the potential for them as an importer of our products, and some potential price impacts there. And then you've got places like Australia, which are relatively sound, and the Australian dollar has increased in value relative to the U.S. dollar. And we compete directly with them on livestock or crop exports, and it makes us more competitive. So the economic situations have been positive for us price-wise as you look at places like Australia, where our dollar has decreased in value relative to those currencies.
Daryl, your thoughts from a livestock point of view?
You know, on the livestock side, there's a couple of things. The international trade on cattle and beef continues very strong. We set a new record in 2011 for beef exports, and we're going to be down a little bit from that this year. But production is also falling, and so when you look at exports as a percent of production, not only in 2012 but even more so in 2013 and 14, it's going to be holding pretty steady. Our prices are working higher because of the supply situation. The Australian dollar and the Canadian dollar are two particularly important currencies relative to the U.S. dollar, because we compete with those two countries in third-party countries in the Asian markets or wherever, and so that's a very important consideration. Imports, on the other hand, have been low but are increasing a bit. We've got some additional demand for hamburger in this country, and that's what a lot of our imported meat is used for. And again, with high prices here, that attracts more meat into those markets. So the international trade part of that is going to continue very important, even though it's going to back away a little bit from 2011 levels. On the domestic side, the macroeconomic effects on beef demand are going to be really important over the next couple of years. We see a very strong correlation generally between domestic beef demand and macro factors like the unemployment rate and the overall income situation for folks in the U.S. And so the rate of recovery, the continued rate of recovery, is going to be a key factor in determining how fast and how soon and how much beef prices in the U.S. They're going to be under pressure to go up, and so that demand factor is going to be an important limit probably to how quickly that can happen as we go forward.
We like to talk about high prices. Producers like high prices without question, but let's talk a little bit about the cost implications and kind of how that factors into profits as well. Kim?
Well, you look, as prices have went up for what we're producing, the prices have also went up for the inputs, and you'd expect that because as prices go up, producers want to increase production, and to increase production, they got to increase the inputs. That increases demand, you get higher prices. That's a long ways around. But look at fertilizer. You can go back to anhydrous or phosphorus or potassium, and down around $200-300 a ton as you get back in 2003, 2004, 2005. In 2008, we had a peak with them all getting up around $700 or $800 or higher per ton. Came down into 2010. And then with the drought, we brought them back up, and with the higher prices, we brought that back up. And you also got to realize that a good portion of our fertilizer is imported. And as we were talking about with the value of the dollar, as it's increased relative to some currencies, as it's declined against others, it's impacted the prices of these inputs. You look at machinery prices, they're higher. Just about all the prices across the board are higher because we've got higher output prices and increased demand for the inputs.
And in terms of feed prices?
Feed prices are at record high, you know, for cattlemen. Hay prices set an all-time record again this year. They've gone up dramatically in the last 2 years. Obviously, high corn prices and grain prices generally has greatly impacted the feedlot sector. So, you know, I tell producers right now, marketing is probably not your biggest challenge because we've talked about high prices. If you have something to sell, it's going to sell pretty well. But whether that turns into profitability is really going to depend on that cost side. And so, you know, you have to manage production, first of all, to produce something, but also then do the best you can in the face of higher input prices to manage that input cost and translate that opportunity in terms of the revenue side relative to cost into a profit opportunity. And it's a continuing challenge, particularly with the continuing drought conditions. Our producers are on the defensive. In many cases, they're having to use sale proceeds from drought to continue production, and that's going to make it you know, a real challenge at some point when we have to rebuild and try to recoup that equity that we're spending right now.
And we definitely hope that sort of regrouping process can maybe start as we move forward. We'll talk more about what we can expect in the year ahead coming up, but first, here's the guys from ShopStop.
Hi, welcome to ShopStop. Today we want to talk about apps for your smartphone that could be handy in the shop.
Yeah, think of your smartphone more than just being a device, but a tool that you can use around your shop.
You know, it's not just to text your kids. There's a lot of useful things you could do with this thing. One of them might be, you know, looking at figuring the dimensions of a triangle. If you know some of the, at least a couple of the angles and one side length, then you can calculate what the other sides are. So there's a lot of computing power in these, and a lot of stuff that's been done for us as far as putting information on the smartphone. Some of it might be maybe looking at drill tap sizes, welding apps to tell you how to set your welder. There's a lot of good information that and apps that you can use that just make time in the shop just a little bit quicker and a little bit easier. So there's some information on apps for your smartphone that'll help you out in the shop. You can check out a link on the SUNUP website and find your way to those. We'll see you next week
On ShopStop.
Landowners in the southeastern part of Oklahoma are probably familiar with how to manage a forest stand, whether it's for timber production or for wildlife values. But in the rest of the state, such as the cross timber zone around Oklahoma City and Tulsa and all through central Oklahoma, forest management isn't talked about as much. And this is unfortunate if you're interested in wildlife, because there's a lot of things you could do kind of borrowing from forest management that you could do on these sites that would still benefit wildlife. We generally call these timber stand improvements, and they can include things like prescribed fire, girdling trees, clipping trees. You can use herbicide. Basically, the premise is we're trying to manipulate the forest structure and composition to meet some objective. So from a whitetail deer perspective, an unmanaged cross timbers can eventually become fairly unproductive. You'll have eastern red cedar come in and start to dominate the site and replace the oak, which is primarily going to be post oak and blackjack in cross timbers. You'll also have an absence of herbaceous plants, you know, those broadleaf plants and vines that are so important for whitetail, and also an absence of browse, you know, shrubs and young regenerating trees that deer forage on at certain times of the year. So if you're going to go into a cross timber stand and try to manage it for whitetail, think about sunlight. How how much sunlight do you have reaching the ground and that is causing this regeneration of a new forest, and also where you're getting herbaceous plants like this croton that I'm standing in. On this site, what we basically have done is we've went in and clipped the cedar, the juniper. We've killed the juniper, and we've also selectively killed some oak with herbicide. We wanted to create forest gaps, essentially, so that we can get this kind of herbaceous response, and also to create browse, plants that are within the reach of deer, because while the oak mast is really important in the fall, most of the year, deer are feeding on broadleaf plants and vines and shrubs and other types of browse. So think about that when you're managing your cross timbers, is to create that diversity for whitetail or whatever species of interest you might have.
Finally, today we want to take a look ahead at some of the trends we can expect in 2013. And Larry, let's start with you. The economy, the Farm Bill, your thoughts as we start the new year.
Well, we'd be remiss if we didn't start with the fiscal cliff, so-called. And I think where I'd like to start is to say that most of us by now have probably figured out it's really a slope or maybe a curb. But there's still some important things to say. I think we need to realize that if we don't have a final answer on this within the next few days, we are going to have a couple of months to do something about it in Congress and with the administration. When we get out about 3 months or so, we're going to begin to reconsider this as a possible cliff. So we're walking that proverbial tightrope right now. It looks like we're coming together and there'll be a solution, but it may take a while to work out the details. And what we've got to realize is that with that, we've bound up the Farm Bill as well. We had the Senate act on that a while back. We had the House Ag Committee act on that a while back. And we're kind of waiting for those to come together and become one bill out of conference that can move forward. The president's been pretty clear that he's going to stay out of it and just sign what comes before him. So the devil will be in the details. And I think as we look ahead to 2013, it will become something that will be an important part of the risk management program for folks. If we get through this fiscal situation that we've developed in Congress, we're going to see that the year is going to be a relatively good one. We'll see a decline in unemployment. The economy will continue to pick up steam, and it'll be a pretty good 2013 for most folks. If we languish around and trying to get a solution for this, we're going to find that we'll probably find ourselves back into another mid-year recession that will be short but serious.
Okay. Kim, are we going to continue to see some decent prices?
I think we're going to continue sideways patterns. The analysts are saying that we can rebuild corn stocks in 1 year. It takes 2 years for wheat stocks. Two things are holding up wheat prices: corn and the drought. If we get rain and we get lots of corn, then I think as we get into June, July, probably August or September, we could see wheat prices back off into the $7 range. Corn prices, Daryl and I have talked about where is the real level of corn prices now. $5.50, $6, somewhere in there, $6 to $7 on wheat. I think that's the prices as we look out in 13 and 14. That's where they're going to gravitate back. Could we see $4.50 corn or $5 wheat? Yes, but I think $6.50 to $7 on wheat, $5.75 to $6.25 on corn is where I think we're going to go. There's a lot of things we can talk about with the government program. Crop insurance, I think, is an important. Those are all uncertain, and we don't know what's going to happen there.
Okay, Daryl, on the livestock front.
Well, in terms of beef markets, from a consumer standpoint, 2013 is going to be important because really the impacts of what's been building for a number of years will start to really come home to roost. We're looking at about a 4.5% year-over-year decrease in beef production in 2013. 2012 is about a 1.5% down, so only a modest amount compared to that. So we're going to see sharply tighter supplies at the consumer level. That's going to put those pressures on, and it's going to depend on that domestic demand question that we talked about earlier in terms of how fast those prices can respond. For producers, with or without good demand, cattle prices are going to stay high. Cattle numbers continue to get tighter. The tightest supplies are ahead of us, probably not until 2014, to be honest with you, but 2013 will be ever tighter supplies, less cattle, not only in the U.S., but in Mexico and Canada as well. And so we're going to see those tight prices. Obviously, from a producer standpoint, especially cow-calf and stocker producers out in the country, it's all about the drought. And if we have more drought, 2013 in Oklahoma could look like a bit of a repeat of 2011. We're facing the prospects of another significant round of liquidation in the Southern Plains if we have a dry spring after a dry winter like we did in 2011. If it rains, we get back on track, we'll see even higher prices for cattle because we'll be trying to save some females. And the watchword there for producers will be how best to recover, given your forages time to recover, and financially the ability to rebuild the cow herd is going to be a slow process for many producers. And so it's one that's going to take some time. It could start in 2013, but it really will just barely get started under the best of circumstances.
And you guys, advice for producers, one final word, Larry and Kim?
Risk management, it's the most important game in town.
Finances, we haven't talked about finances. I think price will take care of itself. If we have high production, we're going to have lower prices, we're going to have the income. If we have low production, we're going to have higher prices. Managing your money to stay in the ball game through good and bad times, I think that's the single most important thing they can do is managing that money.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for the discussion as always, and best wishes for a Happy New Year. And thank you so much for joining us. We also want to say a big thank you to Stillwater Milling Company for letting us spend some time here today. And from all of us here at SUNUP, we wish you a very safe and happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2013.